Well,
We're going to hear about the ancient origins of wine. Then we're going to learn about biblical references
you scared me.
and a little bit about Roman demand.
I wasn't talking about this.
Everybody else, please mute yourself.
Yeah.
Then we're going to learn some interesting things about rabbinic attitudes towards wine. Then we're going to skip over the Muslim conquest, which eliminated wine, and go right to the early Zionist colonies of Rishon LeZion and Zichron Yaakov. And then we're going to introduce Boaz and Moran to talk about modern wine in Israel. And then we're going to have our tasting. Now, before I start, there's some important thank yous to make. The first thank you is to the president of Bethel, Kathleen McFadden, who thought up the whole idea of Jetty Talks and wanted me to do this as a Jetty Talk. And I said, it's too long for a Jetty Talk and we're going to drink at the end. So I'm not so sure you want to do that. And then I want to thank Marcia, who said, why don't you make it like a mission? And that propelled me to try and bring in Israelis into the talk. And one of the stores we always stop in Israel, Bashar's, is a store that Moran has worked with. So Bashar put me in touch with Moran. Then another member of our congregation, Matt Schulman, who's not been on missions with us, but goes to Israel often or as often as he can, actually worked on a vineyard in the Negev. And he said, I think that guy would be very good. And he speaks English. So we have Boaz, who's growing grapes in the Negev, on the call. So it's going to be a wonderful ancient and modern thing. And that's thanks to Kathleen and Marcia, and Boaz and Rena and Moran. And maybe Amnon will throw in a couple of words as well. But special thanks really goes to Ed Kramer, who researched with me for at least 2 or 3 hours what are the best wines we could get in Connecticut. You know, Connecticut, even though it's between New York and Massachusetts, doesn't get the number of wines that New York City gets. So I would come in with a bottle of wine and I'd say, can we get this? And we taste it and it's delicious. And then it would look in his book and the wine isn't registered in Connecticut. So he can't get it in Connecticut. If we didn't have COVID, I might have gone into the city and picked up some of these wines, but with COVID, I didn't go anywhere. So Ed was wonderful. Todd Gibstein has been marvelous. He's been my tutor on Zoom and edited a couple of the things we're going to see. And then the people who poured the wine this morning, for those of you that picked it up, Ella, Elise, Donna, Judy, Kathleen, Ed, we're all pouring this morning so that you got your flights. I want to make the beginning a little bit interactive. So if you have something to say, you don't need to raise your hand, just unclip. What's the first holiday you think of with wine? Matthew?
Passover.
Passover. Whoever said it, Passover.
No, Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, well, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, keep going. What's it's
Purim.
not quite a holiday, but what occurs every week?
Dinner.
Shabbat. Perfect.
How about
We've got
dinner?
Shabbat, we've got Rosh Hashanah. Nobody's mentioned the 3 holidays. What are the 3 holidays we have?
Pesach, Shavuot.
Right. Those 3 holidays, it says, V'samachta b'chagecha, and you should be happy in your holiday. How do you think the rabbis wanted us to be happy?
Drink.
by drinking wine. Now, so we've clearly got wine in our tradition. Every week, 4 cups on Passover, at least a cup every holiday. And when Shabbos is over, nobody mentioned it. What do we drink at Havdalah?
Wine.
Wine. Thank you. Thank you.
Rashi
Those
had
of
a,
you who were not raised in the Jewish faith, can you share some words with us about wine in the Christian faith? What's the big deal about wine in the Christian faith?
It's the blood.
It's the blood of Christ.
Right.
It's the blood of Christ. So wine is central to a lot of Christian tradition, but there are denominations of Christianity where wine is not allowed. The Baptists, not wine drinkers. Black churches, not wine drinkers. There's an entire religion that outlawed wine. Anybody know what religion that is?
Muslim.
Muslim faith.
Right. Islam, wine is forbidden.
And Jerry, Mike said that wine was the first miracle. Miracle?
Okay, whatever.
Jerry,
So Islam outlawed wine, outlawed alcohol.
See,
I want to talk to you a little bit about language for a second. Alcohol is an Arabic word. Another Arabic word that you all know is algebra. Al means the. So algebra was the math of solving for unknowns. Alcohol, the word kahol, you know that in Hebrew, is chol, sand. And what it is it's a distillate. It's the remnants of something, or it's grinding something up very closely. Alcohol is an Arabic word. Yayin, we know is a Hebrew word, but it's a word all over the Middle East. And in Hebrew and in Arabic, you often switch the yud and the vav. For instance, in our creation story, there's Adam and there's Chava. Nobody knows what Chava means until somebody tells you, take the vav and make it a yud. And all of a sudden you have Adam and Chaya. And Chaya means life. In Arabic, vine, they used a vav instead of a yud. In the English language, vine, vinum, Vienna, it's all related to vine. And if you do a pictograph, I don't know if you'll see this, Yud, Vav, Nun, right there. It almost looks like a terrace. And if you rearrange it, it could look like a grape hanging down from a vine. The root of winemaking is to be found in Georgia and Turkey. And I have to get to Google Earth. Noah gets off the ark. Do you all see me?
Jerry, don't forget you got a screen share to show your Google
I'm
Earth.
sorry. Right. So screen share. Screen share.
On the bottom of your screen next to chat.
I got it. All right, now can you see it?
Yes, Jerry.
Okay, good. So there's Mount Ararat, and our first drunken sailor in the world is Noah, who gets his jollies out of planting a vineyard and getting drunk. The story of the flood has a parallel in the Gilgamesh epic, and we think that the flood was actually what created the Black Sea. And the flood was a breach right here in Istanbul that allowed the Mediterranean to flow in and flood this area. So he gets off the ark, according to the fable, plants a vineyard, and gets plastered. His kids are a little bit upset that he's lying around naked, and they cover him up. But that's our first mention of wine in the Bible. The other important mention of wine, unless you think it was only in the north, is when Moses sent out the spies and they came back bearing a vine with grapes across a pole with two shoulders, hanging on to two shoulders. Now I have to stop screen sharing. Okay. There, I'm back. So wine has three tiers in the Bible. Yayin, ordinary, regular wine, maybe a year or two old. Tirosh, which was very fresh wine, right out, fermented just a little bit and drunk. And then Shachar, or Shechar, which you might know as the Yiddish word shikard, or drunk, which was very strong wine that had been fermented for 3 years. Wine and bread were important in Middle Eastern culture before the Jews were there. When Melchizedek, the king of Salem, came out to meet Avram, he brought him bread and wine. That was the offering. Every Friday night, when we, to some degree, replicate the sacrifice in the temple, what is our offering? Bread and wine. Wine was a libation. It was poured out in ritual manners, but it was a libation. Todd, can you put up the photo of the tribes of Israel? Oh, wait. Let's stick with that. Let's stick with that for a second. Okay. So here we have, can you make that bigger, Todd?
Yeah, I'm working on it. Let's see. Keep talking. I'm
right.
working on it.
We have here the origins of the wine in the Caucasus Mountains, and then the Phoenicians bringing it down the coast and spreading it across the Mediterranean, and we have it penetrating Greece. Then, in the next slide, Todd, we see the variety of grapes in Europe today.
Full screen, but maybe I have to do that before.
And all of these grapes, even though they're called, the grapes of Europe, are descendants of the grapes from Georgia. Okay, now you stop sharing for a second and I'm going to share. Okey-dokey. Do you have the map of the tribes, Todd?
I can put it back up, yeah.
Yeah, put up the map of the tribes. So I have to stop sharing. No, the tribes of Israel.
That's the only, I don't think I have that. I don't think I have that, Jerry.
Okay. So stop sharing and I'll share. So the tribe of Ephraim, do you have that text? Woe to the drunkards of Ephraim?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There was one tribe in Israel that was famous for being drunk, for drinking way too much. And that tribe was Ephraim.
See, wait a minute.
That's the next one down. Yep. All right. Woe to the tribes, the drunkards of Ephraim, to those who are overcome with wine. The Ephraim lived in the foothills of Judea, near Samaria, and they were likely suppliers of wine to the kings. The kings delighted in wine. David and Solomon had their own tenders of the vineyards and their own keepers of the cellar. And in the Song of Solomon, which I think is the next slide up, I will read to you from a little bit of the Song of Solomon. No, that's the Isaiah one. Did we not do the Song of Solomon one?
No, I believe you were just going to read it.
All right, I'm going to read it. Kiss me tenderly. Your love is better than wine. We are happy for you, and we praise your love even more than wine. Your love is sweeter than wine. The smell of your perfume is more fragrant than spices. Your arms are vines covered with delicious fruits and all sorts of spices. This is a funny line in the poem. It's a very loving, erotic poem. Your navel is a wine glass filled to overflowing. I think it's actually an after dinner drink, it's not wine. And here it gets extremely erotic, and this is in our Torah. I will discover that your breasts are clusters of grape. Kissing you is more delicious than drinking the finest wine. And finally, she says, Solomon has a vineyard at Baal Hamon, which he rents to others for 1,000 pieces of silver each. My vineyard is mine alone. So wine and vineyards were part of the life of the kings of Israel. However, the prophet Isaiah was very insightful when he saw how God might have considered a vineyard. Can you go to that slide, the Song of the Vineyard, Todd? This is the beginning of Isaiah. I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. The vineyard are the people of Israel. The end of this section of Isaiah reads, "The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah, and the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress." We were a vineyard to God, and we went bad. We went bad. So the vineyard as a reality and the vineyard as a symbol is predominant in the Bible. In Isaiah, he notes that drinking wine was accompanied with singing, which is what we do today. At the end of Kiddush, everybody sings and then we drink the wine. Wine was kept in wineskins and then in amphoras and was measured in ephahs or baths. There were 37 liters to an amphora. Todd, you've got the amphora picture? There you go. That's the equivalent of a wine cellar. 37 liters in each of those jugs. And they were stamped. And they were traded across the Mediterranean. Herod brought in wine from Greece. Wine that was produced in the northern Negev was taken to castles in Arad. But you have to say to yourself, what are they doing with all this wine? And the answer has to do with the Romans. When the Romans conquered Israel and Judea, they brought legions of soldiers in. A Roman legion had 6,000 soldiers. Each soldier was given a liter of wine every day. Now you would say to yourself, how the hell did they win any battles if they were drunk? The reality is that the wine was diluted with water. And in fact, wine was the way to hydrate yourself. Although today when I fly to Israel, I tell people no alcohol while we're flying. Alcohol dehydrates you. The Roman soldier was given a liter of wine every day. 6,000 soldiers in a legion. That's a lot of wine to drink. Now, the rabbis. How many of you have been to an Irish funeral? A few of you probably have. You know, when there's a wake, an Irish wake, it's essentially you get drunk. And I was thinking to myself, I've never been to a shiva call where we've brought alcohol. But back then in the day, in Proverbs it says, Tnu shecher le'oved v'yayin le'marei nefesh. Give somebody wine if they're feeling crappy. And then in Ketubot, it says, you drink 10 cups of wine in a house of mourning. 3 before the meal, 3 during the meal, and 4 after the meal. And then the sages, another 4. People were getting so drunk that the sages took the 4 that they added away. But still, it was 10 cups of wine if you're in mourning. Maimonides and others backed off. So nowadays, getting drunk as part of Jewish mourning is out the window. But in ancient times, 10 and sometimes 14 cups of wine. Now, you've all heard that the rabbis don't issue an order that they don't think the people are going to follow. If you listen to the rabbis, they'll tell you it's because they didn't want the people to become sinners. If you listen to a cynic like me, they'll tell you it's because the rabbis didn't want to lose their authority, so they weren't going to tell you to not do something that you were going to do anyhow. But the case in point is wine and meat. When the temple was destroyed, there was a movement for asceticism amongst the Jews. We were going to deny ourselves. We were going to mourn the temple. And some Jews said, we're not going to eat meat and we're not going to drink wine because meat and wine was what we offered on the altar. And they literally asked the rabbis, shall we drink wine, which is poured as a libation on the altar, and now the altar has ceased to exist? And the rabbis said, you have to mourn. A decree has been issued that we mourn the destruction of the temple. But to mourn excessively, as you are doing, is impossible. As the sages, and this is from the Talmud, do not issue a decree upon the public unless a majority of the public is able to abide by it. So the rabbis knew the Jews were not going to give up drinking wine, and they didn't allow the consumption of alcohol to stop. Now the reverse, and this goes to Passover. In Psachim 109a, the section of the Talmud dealing with Passover, it says, a man is obligated to gladden his children and the members of his household on a festival, as it is stated, V'samachta b'chagecha, you'll be happy in your festival. And then they go on. You and your son and your daughter and your manservant and your maidservant and your Levite and the stranger and the widow, all within your gates, what should one make them rejoice with? Wine. Wine. So we have all of this stuff about the 4 cups of wine or for the 4 words of redemption. But I think the 4 cups of wine of Passover are the rabbis telling us you can get happy with wine. Now, wine was also considered medicine. It was clearly had an effect on your mind. So in Bava Batra, it says, the elders of the Jews say, at the head of all illness am I blood. At the head of all healing am I wine. And then they say, if you can't get wine, you have to use herbs. Then they say, if you want your heart and your mind open, wine will open them to understanding. And then they say, if you want to decrease or slow down your getting older, straighten your stature, improve your vision, you have 3 things. Bread from fine flour, fatty meat, they didn't know from cardiology, and aged wine. Aged wine is that 3-year-old wine that's heavy with alcohol. And then they say, all the other things can work for and against you, but aged wine is effective to heal all the ailments of the body. They further say, if you're a student and you can't afford too much wine, gulp it down quickly. And then comes a very interesting discussion about wine and trees and olives. When you anoint a king, you anoint him with olive oil on his head. But you drink wine. When you say the blessing over olives, it's Borei Pri Ha'etz. But you don't say Borei Pri Ha'etz for the wine, for the grape. You say Borei Pri HaGefen. Now, wine was so important that Rava, one of the great Talmudic rabbis, would drink wine all day the day before Passover to stimulate his heart and whet his appetite so that he would eat even more matzah at the Seder. The Gemara said, a lot of wine stimulates. A little wine satisfies. So wine has two advantages. But remember, we have wine and challah on the Shabbos table. The rabbi said, bread, however, satisfies, but does not gladden. So even though wine and bread were the offerings, it's wine that goes first when we do our Friday night prayers, not the bread. Okay, I'm going to stop now and ask Todd to play a little video of a wine press in the northern Negev from Byzantine times. You with me, Todd? You're muted, I can't hear you.
מצאנו כאן גת של תקופה הביזנטית הקדום בסביבת ה-400 לספירה. הגת כולל רצפת דריכה,
You stick the wine there. You crush the grapes there.
למיץ, ליין. הגת עצמו יצא משימוש באמצע התקופה הביזנטית בסביבת ה-550 והפך להיות אזור של בישולים, מגורים, מדורות. מדובר כאן בבניין גדול, אולי של צבא רומי. יש כאן ציטוט של לבנים כמו שיש לנו מתקנים רומיים בסביבה. אולי הם בית מיוחץ, דבר שחייבים להמשיך לחקור כדי לוודא אם זה נכון או לא נכון. בצד השני יכול להיות שמדובר כאן הרבה חווה, אבל אם כך הוא באיכות מאוד מאוד גבוה.
Okay, so two things, and then I'm going to pass this over to Boaz. The first thing is grapes were cultivated in the northern Negev. The second thing is men crush the grapes. In Europe, you always hear about women crushing the grapes. Men crush the grapes. They built shade covers over the floor where the grapes were crushed. They actually had ropes hanging from the shade covers, and the men hung on to them and crushed the grapes with their bare feet. You've heard, perhaps, about how they found ancient date seeds, and they're growing palm trees from ancient date seeds. They've also found ancient grape seeds, and they could not get the grape seeds to germinate, but they're trying to copy the DNA of the grape seed and recreate the wines that Moses and the Israelites might have encountered. There are ancient grapes, quote, from the time of Jesus. There's a winery in Bethlehem that makes ancient wine, and there's a Mawari, I think it's called, wine in Israel that's been drunk. But I want to skip now to listen to Boaz for 5 to 10 minutes. Boaz is a modern pioneer. He'll tell you what he's doing. And we have some shots of his vineyard. So Todd, if you could bring up those things. Boaz, can you start talking now? There's Boaz and Rena. Boaz, you there?
Is he muted?
Okay. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think all of us know the history of wine, and that traditionally, certainly from the 2nd century BCE through to the time when the Byzantines were conquered by the Muslims, we were producing what was known as the best wine in the world. I'm not sure whether that video was taken or at Avdat or at Shifta, but Shifta, which is not far from us, is a place where they've measured the amount of grapes that their presses could handle. And there are something like 20,000 bottles of wine a day by our 750 measure. So they were producing huge quantities of wine. And when we decided that it was a good idea to fulfill a lifelong dream and grow vines, what people said to us was, look, man, if you want to grow red wine, you're in the wrong place. Because what happens is that the sugar in the grapes rise very quickly, because we get to, in the middle of our growing season, 45, 46 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's maybe around 120 Fahrenheit. And we have to harvest the grapes regardless of the quality of the skin. Now we know that all the character, the bouquet, everything about red wine is about the skin. So what we had to do was try and find a way to lengthen the ripening period so that we could slow down the rise of the bricks, or the percentage of sugar. And my brother, who lectures at the University of Cape Town in South Africa on viticulture, said to me, it's very easy. It's in every book. If you want to lengthen the ripening, you have to add fruit, the fruit load to the vine, and you have to manage your shade canopy. Now, on the modern way that we grow wine vines, it's on a single terrace, a single tier, and they're very close to each other. So to add more fruit is almost impossible. To manage a shade canopy, people have been trying to find a shade cloth system that would work well with grapevines for years, and unsuccessfully. Because the grapes in the early morning need a lot of sun, and from noon onwards they need shade. And in consultation with my brother, we tried to find out a way where we could get the two criteria. We could add more fruit to the vine, and we could manage the shade canopy. And we decided on a two-tier system. In ancient times, 200 years ago, they tried it in the United States, in Washington State. It's called the Niffen trellising system, where you basically replicate your first tier of grapes into a second tier. But they found that in Washington State, there's not enough sun, so the fruit all started moving up to the top tier, and the bottom tier became obsolete. So 200 years ago, that was dropped. In fact, when we thought of what we were doing, I didn't know that this system of trellising existed. Only 2 years after we planted did we actually discover that 200 years ago they were thinking along these lines. And our growing guide, who is a very well-known wine person, I'm sure Moran knows him, Arkady Pipikian. Yeah, he said to me, "Ishtagata." You've gone nuts. What are you doing with the vines? And I'm not a new farmer. And we had a casual gentleman's agreement that we were going to give it a try. And because of how we did it, if it didn't work, it would be very easy to remove the upper tier. And now every year when Arkady comes to visit our vines, he poses next to the double tier. He reckons that our Cabernet field is one of the best in the country. I haven't seen too many others, but we are able to prolong our ripening, particularly of the Cabernet, because this is I still maintain, with opinions about Malbec and all the others, I still maintain that Cabernet is the king of the reds. And we managed to get at least 3 to 4 weeks longer in our ripening process. We harvest the same time as Judea and Samaria do, which is unbelievable. And our bricks is great. We're harvesting Moran. I don't know what your part is, but the way I test when my grapes are ready to harvest is not only the sugar content, but when you bite a bunch of grapes, the juice and the pip and the skin have to be unified in its taste. Then you know that the juice has good color, the pip has even coloration, and it's one unified taste. You don't get a bite of anise from the seed or bitterness from the skin. When it works together, this is when we harvest. And
Okay, Boaz, we're running out of time, so
Okay.
I'd like to move on. Could you just explain very quickly how you manage to irrigate your vines?
First of all, we grow in sand, which is another thing that they told us we'd never get right. It's like sand dunes, like the Sahara Desert. This is where we grow our vines. And my background in agriculture is irrigation. And we've had to develop irrigation protocols that do not exist in the wine industry. We use drip irrigation, but because the water drains very quickly through the sand, we don't have even irrigation intervals. We will give sometimes larger quantities of irrigation and other times shorter quantities. Also, sand has absolutely no organic matter, so all our fertigation, all our fertilization is done through our irrigation. We inject it. But one thing that I would like to add about desert wines, the terroir of a sand dune is almost, there isn't a terroir if one is looking technically at what constitutes a general definition of terroir. But the sand dunes give us a very, very pleasant addition to our wine. We have low tannins and low acidity.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
Very pleasant.
And now, Todd, I'm going to try and go back to this. Can you all see this?
Are you
Hello?
going back to Google Earth?
Yeah,
Make sure you screen share it.
okay.
Yeah, it's not screen shared yet, Jerry.
All right, hang on 1 second. Share screen. Google Earth. All right, do you all see this now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to lead into Moran by giving you a very quick overview of what I love when I take people to Israel, which is the geography of the country. So here you see Israel in front of you, and you see the Kinneret Sea, and you see the Golan Heights. This is volcanic soil. You see the Galilean mountains. Grapes are grown in the Golan. Grapes are grown in the Galil. This is the Carmel mountain range right here. Carmel literally means the grape vineyard of God, Kerem El. And now you see two very important cities, Rishon LeZion and Zichron Yaakov. If you want to know why they're important, I will tell you. This is where Baron Rothschild started modern winemaking in Palestine. And in 1904, Baron Rothschild produced 7 million bottles of wine. And he exported them to Europe. And then he had vineyards in Zichron, which is where the Carmel winery is now. And Moran is going to talk to you about what happened between Rishon LeZion, the early 1900s, the very early 1900s, and the 1990s was not much in terms of winemaking. And then all of a sudden, it blossomed. And here's the Negev. You can literally see how half of Israel is desert. Boaz, where is your moshav?
If you, where your mouse pointer is at the moment, go to the left, you can see Kadesh Barnea.
Yes.
The area where we are. We're in those sand dunes.
So he's growing grapes here.
Yes.
And then people are growing grapes here in the foothills of
Jerusalem.
Judea and higher in the Judea. And people are growing grapes here and here and here. And now we're going to hear from Moran Asor. Moran, you're the host, so I think you could just take it over, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Right.
Welcome.
So, yeah, thank you. First, welcome everybody. And it was very interesting, Jerry. I was really listening to you, the history of wine. Just a bit of who I am and how did I get to the wine field in Israel. I'm 20 years in the wine business. I started as a sommelier. I'm speaking also French, so maybe you, in English, we can hear my French accent sometime. And I was working at the best restaurant in Tel Aviv and also in the north of Israel. And 10 years ago, I opened my own business where I don't see everybody, where I'm all that I learned as a sommelier, I am teaching. If it's in workshop or wine tour in Israel or in France, all the vineyards, and if somebody needs any advice in a wine shop or restaurants, so that's what I'm doing. And in the Corona, I'm doing lots of workshop by Zoom. So actually, I will show you later what I did after a year in a Zoom session. I did something special for testing wine. But you got also small bottles, I saw. So I did it also. So I'll show you now. It's like this. It's called Petit Sommelier. And you open it, and then you have the bottle inside. Small bottles I put inside, and I can get 2 people to test wine by Zoom. Something good happened in the Corona. Okay, so I did you. Everything is very organized, but I'm going to share my screen, and you will see, and we will start. Okay, So we're going to talk about the evolution of wine in Israel from the 90s till modern times. So we heard enough about what happened in history, and Jerry was right about that till the 90s, since Edmond Rothschild arrived and really made wine from Rishon to Zichron, till 1983, nothing too important happened in Israel by wine industry. Most of the wine that were made was kosher and cooked. But then, in the 90s, when Ramat Golan arrived, happened a free revolution, I call it. The first one is when Ramat Golan arrived in 1983. I will talk about them later. And the quality of the wine got better because they made kosher wine, but not cooked for the first time. So it was quality wine made at last. The second thing that happened, but it's not the second revolution, but things that happened that bring us to the second revolution is that boutique winery as Margalit were popping up. Margalit is one of the the first boutique winery. Boutique winery is a small winery by quantity. I will talk about it also later. And Margalit is one of the well-known small boutique winery and very, very good quality wine. Another thing that happened is that when we have to understand that I will talk about it also, that when Edmond Rothschild saw Israel for making wine, he saw only the cost because we didn't have the Golan and we didn't have the Galilee by that time. But later on, when we got all that, so we saw that there is lots of terroir in Israel where we can make wine. And one of it was the Galilee. Upper Galilee, as we saw in the Google Earth, have a very good land for wine. It's Terra Rossa and גיר, בועז, תעזור לי, גיר, שכחתי, צ'אל.
Limestone.
Limestone, yeah, limestone, exactly. Terra Rossa and limestone. So we have lots of winery now in the Upper Galilee, but the first winery was Dalton, and the one that discovered it's a good terroir is not Dalton, it's Segal winery, and with two vineyards that called the Dovev and Dishon. In 1998, we have the small wineries in families winery in Judean Mountains, as Flam Winery, and also Casteller that I didn't mention here in 1992, and Sora, and some small wineries also in the Golan that started. And the second revolution, so till 2000, we have maybe 20 wineries in Israel, and in 5 years, we get like 350 wineries. So it's getting very high, very fast, and I will explain why and what really happened. And the third revolution is that we understand that we are a hot climate, a Mediterranean, and we need to adapt grape to the climate. So this is the meaning of terroir. So it takes time, and we see it in the third revolution. So we're starting now. The first revolution was quality kosher wines. So the Golan Heights Winery was established in 1983. First, Chatzor Haglilit is on the way to the north, just after Rosh Pina, if you've been in Israel. And then they moved to Katzrin, in the south of Katzrin, south of the Golan. Katzrin is the city in the Golan Heights. And their production is 6 million of bottles a year, and they are not the biggest winery in Israel. The biggest winery is Barkan. They were the first to win the first gold medal in Vin Expo in Bordeaux in 1985. And since then, they are winning a lot of awards and they are very well reviewed. I can say that their Cabernet Sauvignon Yarden is almost every year in Wine Spectator 100 the best wines in the world. So they were, like I said before, they were the first to make quality kosher wine and not cooked. They are very good single vineyard. If you heard about Catherine, El Rom, Ortal, Rome, and these small single vineyards are making, so they can catch up with the competition of boutique winery, because boutique winery by quantity, they are smaller. And when you make 6 million bottles, you get bigger. But when you get a single vineyard, you can do exactly what the boutique winery are doing just by the single vineyards. They fixed a very high standard from the beginning of their way for quality and renovation in Israel. And I can say that since they have been established, we can see very, everything is different. Like really the quality is first. And renovation, they were the first to bring Gewürztraminer, Viognier, Syrah. So chapeau to Golden Knights. And you can see some very nice picture. So this one here, yes, it was from last week. We can see here Yaakov Arodem is one of the winery, small boutique winery in the Golan Heights, and it was snowing last week, so it's beautiful to see. I just put this picture from someone that sent it to me. And here you can see the Mont Hermon and the Golan Heights vineyards, and from here it's without the snow. So it's a very nice view, very nice photo. They sent it to me, Golan Heights Winery. Okay, so the second revolution, they call it in Israel, the Bag 2000. The Bag 2000, we all thought that something on it with the computers and high-techs, but no, it was in the wine. Wineries just popped up like mushrooms, really. Like I said, from 20 to 350 in 5 years, and those days we are talking about 450 wineries in Israel. So I'm just naming them, just naming a few of them, yes? From north to south, you have industrial winery, boutique, and garage. In the Golan Heights and Upper Galilee, you got Pelter, Ar Odem, Maor, Adir, Luria, Asaf, Shvo, Ramot Naftali. In South Galilee, yeah, the Galilee now is also Upper Galilee, South Galilee, and West Galilee. So in South Galilee, you have Netofa, Tavor, Tulip, Amphora. I didn't mention even the West Galilee, where you have Stern, Abaya, and Lotem, small wineries. In the center, in the coast, you have Vitkin, Alexander, Rekanati, Bar Maor. In the Judean Mountains, Yehuda, Ilis, Susan Yam, Yafo, Svera, Clodegat, Moni, Castel, Flam, and really there is more, lots more. South of Negev, we just heard about it, so you have Ramat Negev, Yatir, Nana, and I don't know the name of your winery, Boaz. Never heard.
He bottles at Ramat Negev. He bottles the vineyard.
Okay, good. I love them. Yeah.
And we visited Adir and Tulip regularly with our missions, and also Amphora.
Good. So I mentioned them. I mentioned everybody of them. Good. So the difference between the wineries in size is that industrial winery make more than 100,000 bottles a year, up to millions bottles. Like I said, Barkan is the biggest with 50 million bottles a year. The Carmel is used to be the biggest, but now it's not, and they're making 12 million bottles a year. Carmel winery and boutique winery, they make less than 100,000 bottles a year, like Castel and Flam that are making 17,000 bottles a year. Garage winery are very small wineries that used to make wine in their garage. And now it's not legal anymore. You need to make wine in an industrial building. So the health department got inside of it and said that people can't really make wine at home or in the garage. It's not, let's say when in Corona time, it can be not proper, but they said it before. And garage winery make really small quantity, up to 10,000 bottles a year. But as I mentioned, Zaberman, they only make 4,000 bottles, very small. And now they are building their winery, so maybe they will get bigger. So the definition here is not by law. We have not any law that's saying this is industrial, this is boutique, this is garage, but it's very common in the wine field and everybody knows that this is the quantity. So, but the third revolution is interesting, it's all about terroir. So we understand that we need grapes that are adapted to our climate, and we see the difference that is going to happen in the third revolution only 5 years ago. We understand that not only Cabernet, this is Cabernet. 1 second. So we have here Cabernet. You can see the small grapes normally. And here, so from Cabernet to Carignan. And I will explain what happened. So to understand the terroir, first, it's all the environment that can affect the grapes. So the sun, the soil, the scent, the soil itself, everything. If it's near to the river, near to the coast, if it's in heights or not, everything affects that. But it takes time and research and experimentation to understand a terroir, what happened to the grapes. It takes years. So, like I said, Edmond Rothschild only saw Zichron to Rishon because there was no Golan. The map of Israel was smaller, no Galilee. And he thought that the terroir is similar to Bordeaux or to a bit of south of France. So there was a lot of plantation of Cabernet and Merlot, and all the Bordeaux grapes, but some Carignan also, likely. In the 70s, comes some expert from Davis University, and the Golan was after the Syria war, so we had the Golan, and they saw the potential in the Golan Heights, and they said that this is similar terroir as California and Napa Valley. But still the grapes, same, Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, like in California. So all these beliefs, most of the plantation were Bordeaux grapes. Syrah was first planted only in 2000 and was a success, but not enough to make the switch to Rhone Valley grapes all over. So it takes time. The change arrived only last 5 years ago. In the last 5 years, a new age of winemaker that learned outside of Israel enology, and advisors from all around the world are helping a local producer, and then we understand what's adapted to our climate, which grape. Old vines of Carignan, like 40 years, 60 years old, that were abandoned near Zichron, now come back to life, and they have great result. Really, the Carignan in Israel is excellent. And sof Eureka, we understand that we are a Mediterranean climate, so let's act like one. And the massive plantation of grapes suitable for hot climate began to rise all from the south Rhone and south of France, such as Mourvèdre, Grenache, More Carignan, Cinsault, and some white even from the Rhone, Roussanne and Marsanne. So we see now lots of wineries that really the plantation is getting like 50% or 60% Cabernet Merlot and all the Bordeaux grapes, and then all the Rhone and the South France and You get all these grapes, Mourvèdre, Grenache, and Carignan, also in Spain. So all the climate, Mediterranean climate. The understanding, as the wine are beginning to suit the climate, so it can suit it also our food. Our food is very spicy. We have lots of spices in our food and very good restaurants. So the wine now is adapted to the food also. So, and there is also more wine study in Israel. WACT arrived 4 years ago. I learned there. I did the level 3. And lots of sommeliers learned there, and lots of people from the wine industry and young people getting inside of it also. There is more consumption of wine, especially in the Corona time. The business of wine is getting great in the Corona. More rosé in the last 2-3 years. So this is excellent, because before, like 5 years ago, everybody was drinking only red, even when it's 30-40 degrees outside. So now we understand that rosé and white wine are also excellent. There is more wine bar, online wine shop, lots of group of tasting wine, visits to winery by younger people that doing the Instagram photo. And there is a first appellation like AVA in the States, so wine in Israel, in the Judean mountain. So quality grapes from designated origin. It's excellent. So it's a first movement. I hope it will get to all the terroir in Israel. And all of that is increasing the consumption of course, of wine, developing the market. It's an healthy competition and recognition outside of Israel as a wine country. Jancis Robinson came to visit Israel and all the wine and tested lots of that, and she wrote about it, some articles, and Wine Spectator just took out, I think it was 3 years ago, about the wine of Israel. I hope that you all read it. It was excellent. And here you can see the first AVA of Israel, the Judean Hills, and this, sorry, one second. And this sign, Yikve Yehuda, will be on all the wine that comes from this area, all the winery. From
So
now and
that was a big issue in Israel for many years. People were arguing for appellation.
Yes, that's right. This is the first appellation in Israel.
There was a wine that they would sell that was sold by the altitude, how high the grape was. Barkan, sold by the height. So it wasn't an appellation, but it was by height, where the height of the grapes being grown.
Yes.
It's a big debate in Israel, having appellation.
Yeah, it was. But this is the first appellation that's saying this is the area, this is the grapes that you're supposed to grow here, and this is the geography. And they are talking about making it also the quality and everything, but it's only the beginning. They are starting only in 2019.
Moran, Gemalt?
סיימתי, כן.
כן, טוב, בסדר. I wanted to tell everybody that one of the beauties, and there isn't appellation yet, but when you travel to France, you have to travel a long way to taste all of the different things. In Israel, you can taste wines in the Golan, and wines in the Galil, and wines in the Carmel, and then wines in the Judean mountains, and we haven't gone there yet, but someday we'll go to the wines in the Negev. And you can do all of those appellations in 2 or 3 days. It's absolutely wonderful. And in fact, in our partnership area of Afula Gilboa, we have the Tavor wineries, and then we have a young family, not a young family, a small family, the Nachmanis, who make wine right in Ganer, where Asaf Ron and a couple of our young emissaries live. There's a winery right in the town. And I've brought 2 or 3 missions to that winery. We're now going to do the tasting. Moran, thank you very, very much.
Welcome.
And we're going to have some Golan wines and some Segal wines in the tasting. So if you could grab your little bag if you have it, and if you didn't participate in the tasting, stay on anyhow, because it'll be interesting to hear what's going on. And Ed, are you almost ready to go?
All set, Jerry.
Okay, hang on 1 second. Get your wine glasses out.
Get your samples out, your wine glasses, a
Not
cracker.
that I'm a stickler for this, because I often drink wine right out of a regular glass, but this is my red wine glass, and this is my white wine glass.
Okay.
Like anchors. And take it away, Ed.
Well, there's two ways to go about the wine tasting. And the way that I present it is there's two approaches. One is the theoretical approach, which I'm going to start off with for each wine. And that tells you the proper temperature to drink it at, the proper glass to drink it from, the food you might want to pair with it because they go best with it, and so forth and so on. That's what we call the theoretical or textbook approach. The second approach is the practical approach. It says that you drink whatever wine you most enjoy with whatever you happen to be eating at whatever temperature you like it, and out of whatever vessel you happen to have available. So there's two approaches and we practice both of them. As far as wine glasses are concerned, it can make a difference. A number of years ago, I used to do a lot of wine dinners with the Mondavi and the Riedel Wine Company. And we would start out with a wine, which oftentimes was a Sauvignon Blanc or the Fumé Blanc, which we're going to do today. And we would pour it first in a regular, quote unquote, Libby glass and give everybody a sip, and then pour it in the appropriate Riedel crystal glass, the Sauvignon Blanc glass. And 90% of the people walked out of there amazed that the glass that you use can make such a difference in the taste of the wine. But again, the practical approach says, do whatever you like, however you need to do it. So with that, we're going to start out with the first wine. The little bottle says Dalton Moscato Fumé Blanc. This is the real bottle. And it's from Galilee, as all of these wines are. It's light in body with soft acidity, combining the fruity aromas of citrus and guava together with a subtle, tasty oak characteristic. It's 85% Sauvignon Blanc and 15% Semillon. It's been aged somewhere between 3 and 5 months in oak. And it's more floral and fruity than, for example, a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Pairs well with grilled or baked fish, roast chicken, and spicy Thai food. Now, it's made from the Sauvignon Blanc, but it's called Fumé Blanc. They're one and the same. That name was popularized back in the 1970s by Robert Mondavi, who wanted to produce a higher quality Sauvignon Blanc and started with the oak aging. And he's the one that started that trend. It's now gone worldwide, although most of the Sauvignon Blancs are aged in stainless steel to accentuate the flavor profile of the crispness and the acidity and the floral aromas. So I invite you to taste it. It's got a mouth-watering freshness and brightness.
I will add to that also Sauvignon Blanc comes in origin from Sancerre, and Pouilly-Fumé is the village just next to it. So the name of Fumé Blanc is also like been taken from there, but they are not aging the wine. Some of them do it now, aging the wine in barrels. So
yes, and The Sauvignon Blanc is also, as Morin said, the primary grape of the Loire Valley white, Sancerre. All right. What I'm doing now is dumping that out. Rinsing with a little water. And the correct thing to do between wine flights is to have a benign cracker. What I'm using is a piece of matzah, just to clean the palate so we can go on to the next wine, which is the Gamla Chardonnay. Let's see if we can get the proper light on that. And we're all set for wine number 2.
That's different. I have the bottle, but it's empty.
Can you show the bottle again, Ed?
Swirl it around. Notice the color and consistency of the liquid in the glass. That's the first taste, the first indication of whether it's light, whether it's full body. Gives you a little indication of the kind of wine you're going to be tasting. The wine exhibits bright aromas of citrus, floral, apple, and tropical fruit. But you can also, and here again, this is the theoretical aspect, you also should be able to taste the subtleties of pear, green apple, honeydew melon, and citrus with a hint of French oak. Now, this is just lightly oaked. And by doing that, it gives a little bit more backbone and structure to the wine, but it doesn't overpower the tropical fruits that the winemaker wants to highlight. This is considered a medium-bodied Chardonnay, pairs well with salmon fish cakes, roast chicken with tangerines, or any citrus marinade, grilled vegetables, or sushi. Enjoy.
And I taste the pear in this.
Yes.
Ed, how long was this one aged in oak?
A very short time. I don't know the exact number of months. It varies by vintage, but maybe only 3 or 4 months. It's just lightly oaked. Now, as far as these profiles, they call them taste profiles. It's very subjective, and we all bring to the table certain, I call it biases, baggage, that influence what we pull out of the particular wine. And I can tell you a story that they had 10 wines. The people with the best noses are the perfume people in France that make perfume. And they had the wine consortium in New York taste the 10 wines and list 10 characteristics that they pulled out of each wine. They then took the same 10 wines over to the perfume makers in France and asked them to do the same thing. And believe it or not, only 2 or 3 characteristics were the same. And that's based on where they're coming from. So again, very subjective. Again, the practical approach says the bottom line is enjoyment. We now move along to number 3. No, okay. Number 3 is the Seagull Fusion. There we are. They make a fusion red and a fusion white. Jerry and I selected the fusion red. This is a blend, 60% Merlot, 20% Cabernet Franc, which is often used as a blending agent. It's a Bordeaux style blend, and 20% Cabernet. It's ruby to purple in color, medium bodied, softly tannic blend. As we heard before, the Israeli wines often have these soft tannins, not tannins that knock your socks off. They have fresh, when you stick your nose in the glass, here's what you should pull out, or may pull out: fresh aromas of black currants and berries, as well as a hint of herbaceousness. This wine pairs well with tomato-based dishes, and I can tell you that in doing wine dinners, we're always looking to perfect pairings. There are a lot of discussions that go into it, but one of the most challenging food items to pair wine with is tomato, because it's the acidity of the tomato. So it pairs well with tomato-based dishes such as casseroles and poultry, as well as beef and lamb. It's a well-rounded wine with exotic spices, but yet it's fruit forward. So it's a very easy to drink, enjoyable red wine. And this is the Segal Fusion Red. Now, in tasting wines, number one, you have basically a 2-ounce serving of each. So with 5 wines, you're getting 10 ounces of wine, which is the equivalent of about 2 full glasses of wine if you drink it all. The tastings are small. And one of the reasons for doing that is that we want your palate to be as fresh at the end for the 5th wine as it was at the beginning for the 1st wine. So some people will even not even drink it. They'll look at it, swirl it, get the aromas, get a little taste, and spit it out, which you will see a lot of that happening when we go to the, for example, professional tastings, or you go to a Wine Spectator Grand Awards tasting. You'll see an awful lot of that with spit buckets and water vessels and the pitchers of water to cleanse the glass, and also a wafer or cracker to also cleanse the palate in between each wine. The next wine, which is a red as well, is the Carmel. This is their selected Cabernet Sauvignon. It is, the Cabernet Sauvignon grape is the driest of all the red wine grapes. It's a delightful, medium-bodied, purple-hued wine, which carries pleasant amounts of berry fruit, black currants, and ripe plums. Berry fruit, black currants, and ripe plums, characteristic of the Cabernet Sauvignon grape, especially coming from Israel. Now, depending on where your Cabernet comes from, it could have tobacco, it could have some smoke, could have some other characteristics. It poses young, light, and is fruit forward. It is among the best-selling wine brands in Israel, as we heard before on a previous slide. That's the Carmel, one of the first, I think, in Israel. Enjoy it with beef, venison, poultry, pasta, and barbecue, because it will stand up to the strong flavors. So enjoy Caramel Cabernet.
That's pretty good.
And another characteristic of Cabernet also can be pepper. All right. Any questions so far?
Yeah, Matt asked a question about alcohol content of wines in Israel versus wines in France. Moran, maybe you could answer it. I don't think there's a difference.
No.
Is there a difference in alcohol content between the two countries?
No.
Yes, between France to Israel?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, yes. Israel is hotter, so we have more alcohol. And we can get to 14, 15 degrees of alcohol, even 16 sometimes. And France are around 13 to 14, it's the top that you can see there. So in the white wines also of France can be 12 and a half, 13 most, but in Israel it will be 13 and a half average.
It's a little more alcoholic in Israel.
Yes, of course.
It can be. It can be. This Caramel Cab is 14% alcohol. In previous vintages, it goes up to 14.5%. It's a function of the degree days, how hot it gets. We'll have some of that determination. It's also when they stop fermentation in the winery. And that begs a whole nother question as to is wine, some of the purists will say that wine is made in the vineyard. Other purists will say wine is made in the winery. And the short answer is it's a combination of both, because it takes both quality grapes, which you have to take into account the terroir, the climate, the soil, and you have to take into the skill of the winemaker who makes the finished product. Thank you. So next, the last wine we have is a dessert wine. We're going back to white because it's sweet. We normally go in a tasting from, as we did tonight, from dry to sweet. And this one is the Dalton Moscato. So it's another Dalton wine. It's their Moscato, which is a sweet, refreshing, and aromatic wine with a mild effervescence to it. And the way we describe that is say it sort of tickles your tongue as you drink it. It's not considered to be a sparkling wine, but it has that mild effervescence. It's a great digestivo, a fitting end to a good meal. And as we say, a meal without wine is like eating. A meal with wine is dining. And this is a good a light dessert wine. It's used in place of, for example, people, when they finished a meal, when I first started out in this business, you know, cordials were big. So they would have Grand Marnier, or they would have Cointreau, or they would have a cordial. And as people practiced moderation and were looking for lower alcohol substitutes, they transitioned to the dessert wine, which is lower in alcohol than those cordials, but yet very satisfying and acts as a digestivo in the same way that they did. So this is the Moscato Grape. And also, it's the grape that for many years was not a standalone grape. It gained in popularity as the primary grape of Asti Spumante. Only people were drinking Asti Spumante and never realized that the primary grape was Moscato. All of a sudden, it started getting marketed as a standalone grape, as many have become. And it is sweet, slightly sweet, refreshing, aromatic, a mild effervescence on the palate. It shows hints of peaches, melons, nectarines, and exhibits a perfect balance between sweetness and acidity. Fruity, light, low in alcohol, and effervescent. It's 5 to 6% alcohol, which makes it particularly suitable for use, for example, during Passover. It pairs well with most desserts, such as fresh fruit, cakes, and puddings. But as we said in the beginning, drink it whatever you most enjoy it with. So some people will use this as a dinner wine if that's what you're so inclined to drink. Any questions on the wine that we've tasted today? This is the Dalton Moscato bottle, and
It's very good. And you sold me a few years ago a Golan Moscato that was also excellent.
well, Moscato has that flavor profile, that flavor characteristic. One more quick story about knocking down the mystique about wines. When I was younger and just starting out in this business, I took a lot of wine courses. And some of you may remember Kevin Israeli, who was the wine manager for Windows on the World before the demise. And he was doing a seminar. It was made up of people with all different levels of wine knowledge. And he asked, who's a wine aficionado, who's midway, who's just starting out. And, people raise their hands. He said, okay, we're going to start off the tasting with a blind tasting. And he had 2 bottles of wine in brown paper bags. And they went around and poured the wine number 1, wine number 2. And then he said, we're going to have a discussion about the merits of each wine. We want to talk about the aroma. We want to talk about the flavor profile. We want to talk about the characteristics that we see in the glass. And for a good 15 or 20 minutes, went around the room and everybody bantered about that. And they also indicated which wine they liked the best. When the discussion ended, he took the bags off the 2 bottles of wine. They were both the same. So, yes, it's very subjective. Again, you bring to the table your flavor profiles that you're used to, that you identify with, but it's very subjective. And again, the bottom line with all of this is enjoyment. Find a wine that you like, enjoy it, but that doesn't preclude you from continuing to reach out, because the next best wine that you find may still be out there, and you might find something that you like even better than your favorite wine. So enjoy, keep trying different wines, and enjoy them.
I want to jump in here now and field a couple of questions. The first question, maybe Moran and Boaz can answer. Are there organic wines in Israel?
That's not the first question.
Moran, did you hear me?
Question is,
Yeah, I hear you.
show me
Organic wines.
why it's still how they change.
Organic wine. There is some organic vineyards, like all them organic vineyards in the Golan Heights, and I know about organic vineyards in Tzivon, in the West Galilee, and maybe there is some, maybe Boz will say about it, I'm not sure, in the Negev. About organic wines, as organic, I know on wine winery also in the Galilee, as Lotem, I mentioned before, is doing organic wine. But if we are talking about biodynamic wine, so it's different from organic. We don't really have biodynamic right now in Israel. Abaya is saying that he's doing biodynamic wine, and maybe there is another winery, but we are not really.
Somebody wants an explanation of what was Yayin Mevushal and
Like-
yain lo
Like,
mevusal.
Okay, that's it. That's it. That's
maybe
good.
Boaz know better.
Yain mevushal is something that was introduced by the sages. The reason for it was that so many of the non-Jewish religions would also use wine in their religious practices, and the importance of wine in Judaism obviously is really important, because we believe that the fruit that Eve gave to Adam was wine. And the belief in Judaism is that if you need to make tikkun, you have to make tikkun or reparation with what caused the problem. So there was a great fear that pagan religions would use our wine sacrilegiously. So they on purpose would destroy the wine by pasteurizing it. And so the non-Jews would use the better wine for their religious rites, and we would be stuck with the bad wine for our religious rites. Today, the only stipulations for kosher wine is that it's a new bottle. It has to be closed twice. In other words, with a cork and a cap. This is why there's not a great amount of wine in Israel with screw tops, because it doesn't meet the kosher requirement. And also, from the time the grape is tirosh, only Shomer Shabbat can handle the wine. My winemaker is not Shomer Shabbat, so he has to get the mashgiach to bring and touch the barrels. And so that basically is the reason for mevushal, to destroy the wine, so that the pagans would use the better wine.
Okay, it's been a long session, but I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Boaz, Moran especially, for preparing the nice presentation, Ed Kramer for guiding us through the tasting. If you want details of the Talmudic excerpts I used in my talk, just send an email to office@bethel.com, and they will send you the pages with the citations from the Talmud about wine in mourning and celebration and wine in medicine. So if you want the details, you'll be able to get them by just sending them there. I want to tell you that Ed has a man who's a wonderful wine consultant in his shop. What's his name, Ed?
Joe Leder.
Joe Leder is Roz Leder's son. And he's been guiding me in buying wines now for probably 15 years. And he's never gone wrong. And the wines that Ed decides to stock in his store are wines that he has tasted and said, this is worthwhile. And I think Sue Miller asked me about cooking with wine. Is that correct, Susan? So the Tavernello, is that the way I'm pronouncing it right, Ed? The Tavernello is a great cooking wine, very reasonable, that we've been using for quite a few years. Moran, I hope to see you when I get to Israel.
Yeah, me too.
Come and visit you. Moran lives in a village called Bethlehem HaGalil, Bethlehem in the Galil, which was probably the real Bethlehem that Jesus was born in.
Yes.
I can't tell you how enjoyable this was for me. I hope it was enjoyable for you. And l'chaim, drink wine.
Fine.